Back live with you tonight, and thanks for staying on. The National Planning Commission is calling for the crafting of what is termed the Vision Beyond 2030. The Commission says this vision must be based on prioritising a national infrastructure implementation program, building a national state capacity, and building a program that would professionalize the public sector, amongst other things. All right, for more on this, I'm joined now by Professor Julian May, who is the National Planning Commissioner. Prof, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Maybe as a start, how different is this Lekgotla gathering that you would have held when you compare it to the National Planning Summit, which you held a couple of months ago?
This was a very frank meeting. I think we are quite concerned that we have not been making progress, that there is a significant need for course correction. We need to be frank. We need to face up to the realities of South Africa in 2024, and we need to be very mindful that we have just 6 years to go before 2030. And so this was a very engaged, actually quite a tiring Planning Commission, Lekgotla, where colleagues talked very frankly with each other.
So poverty eradication, the last time you saw those numbers move even an inch was in 2006, 2011, from 51% to 36% then. It has immediately, since thereafter, been moving up and getting worse and getting worse. What is the conversation around that particular aspect and how you fix the state in terms of poverty eradication?
Okay, so poverty eradication is my passion, and it's been my passion for the last 40 years. And what is happening is deeply concerning. I think COVID and how we dealt with the medical crisis really had a lot to do with entrenching problems that were already there and in a sense setting us back from the targets that we hope to achieve. I believe what we are seeing now in terms of poverty in South Africa is the most difficult kind of structural poverty to eradicate, where we have a population who have nothing. They have wound up on the streets. The people who used to look after them are no longer willing to do so or cannot possibly afford to do so. And so we have poverty which is the most expensive, the most difficult kind to eradicate, the poverty of the extreme poor, the homeless. We also have an issue where we have a population of people who have managed to break through, who've managed to get a salaried position, but are now called upon also to look after family members who are expected to support other children of their family through school, who are expected to be able to look after many others in their family who are in a difficult position. And so that then drains the potential of South Africa's emerging middle class to be able to invest and to be able to save. So it's not only the very poor that we need to be worried about, it's the ones that are not very poor but are required to assist those who are very poor. We're in a quite difficult moment at the moment because we can't rely now on simply increasing the amount of money that the state offers for the child support grant or the old age pension.
Yeah.
We're going to have to find other ways of dealing with the problem.
So how do you advise the President as the Planning Commission? What interventions are you bringing in terms of policy? Because you've got, in those years, 2006, 2011, where there was a broad consensus that we are all going towards a particular goal, and so the private sector would have come on board. But we have now since seen a drifting apart where there is ideology in the ANC, for example, that is strong, that is becoming a deterrent to the private sector, who are, for example, worried about property rights, who are worried about the labor regime and higher wages than being able to afford. So they don't open the doors for more people to be employed, and so on and so forth. How do you advise the President?
Watabi, you put your finger very carefully on exactly one of the big issues. The National Development Plan, when it was designed, really did bring together South Africans from all the sectors, from the public, private, labor and civil society, all endorsed the National Development Plan as a vision for the future. And that, I think, is why the National Planning Commission remains so convinced that the long-term plan for South Africa is of vital importance. It's a thing that can potentially unify us. How do we advise the President? Well, at the moment, interestingly, the thing that is the most challenging for South Africa is actually a huge opportunity. And the thing that is really challenging is what we experience on a regular basis. Our infrastructure needs a huge investment, whether it's energy or whether it's water or whether it's digital, our ability to be able to use it to capture the fourth industrial revolution. All of these require a massive investment. And it's an investment which exceeds the possibilities of the state being able to do that. So we absolutely and critically must have partnerships between those who have the funds, mostly the private sector, but also potentially labor, and those who require an investment. Here, the state, the municipalities, the provinces who need that infrastructure rebuilt. Something that the National Planning Commission is pushing quite hard and which we quite frequently advise the President is use this infrastructure deficit as an opportunity. Let's find ways of investing in infrastructure in a way that generates jobs, that delivers services, and also, critically, does not increase inequality. Yeah. So that's where the Planning Commission is focusing.
So how do we do that in a South Africa where seemingly race, spatial planning, class, and gender privilege is still seemingly very much prevalent in terms of the quality of services that are being given in various parts of society?
Absolutely. That's the challenge. I think overall we have underestimated the incredible damage that apartheid spatial planning did to South Africa. We remain, regrettably, in highly segregated areas where spaces exist which are underutilized, unexploited, and as a result we are unable to create communities on the ground that are working together. I think that is an absolutely fundamental issue which we need to address, and perhaps we haven't thought hard enough about the impact that that kind of segregated planning resulted in during the apartheid years. But again, there are opportunities here. Those empty spaces can be filled. They can be developed in ways which can produce economically vibrant communities. So something, again, which we are arguing is if you look elsewhere in the world, there are opportunities for what is termed blended finance. In other words, ways in which you can reassure the private sector that their investment is in fact going to yield a return. Here an example is exactly what is going on when we think about the sector focusing on energy generation. We need to find new ways of generating energy in a way which is reliable and cost effective. There is money to be made. There is a return on a capital investment that can be captured, and that would be of interest to everybody. People who require the service and people who are providing the capital who require a return on their investment. So again, these are the kinds of opportunities that we're urging the President and also the ministers and the other divisions of government to be able to start focusing upon.
So there are, of course, some who are saying, well, even in that infrastructure, for example, around energy, the big challenge that you would face right now, even if you want to invest in that space, is there is no common vision around the just transition and how it should be carried out. Some saying, no, let's close the old coal-fired power stations. And then the minister says, no, that's not going to happen. And you have money that is being made available in billions for the just transition. But you can't use that money right now because the policy direction, as articulated by the minister, says we still have a lot of coal. Those mines are still going to be with us.
I think that in some ways is the value of something like the National Development Plan. The notion that we have a long-term plan, a plan that spans decades. So take the example that you referred to, the coal industry. It would be obviously foolish to close our coal industry very quickly. There are many jobs, there are entire communities, there are towns that are dependent upon the fact that there are miners who work hard and then are able to earn income and spend the income in those towns. We can't obviously afford to lose that. But I don't think anyone's actually proposing that. Coal will remain part of our energy mix for the future. We need to start thinking about how do we move beyond the fact of using coal, and how do we create other kinds of ways in which people can generate livelihoods in the coal-producing town, and how do we create new towns that will generate livelihoods for new forms of energy. So again, it's about the notion of a long-term future. I think one of the difficulties for a planning commission is to convey the idea of time. A national development plan, when it was designed, was already something which spanned 30 years. Probably that is actually too short a time. To be able to plan for the future, you're thinking about generations. And this has been the case elsewhere in the world. When we look at the transitions that took place in Germany after the war, or Japan after the war, or in Korea, all of those took time. And that's really what a planning commission and a national development plan can offer.
Professor Julian May, National Planning Commissioner, coming out of a robust meeting this past weekend. Very tiring, he says, because they were very frank and they were going deeper into some of the detail of what needs to be done to unlock those three areas: poverty eradication, reducing inequality, and reducing unemployment. There is, I know you're not saying it's a silver bullet, but it keeps recurring, even in the review in 2020, this notion of the professionalization of the public sector as a way of solving a number of the challenges that we are facing. Why is that so important?
What we've observed over the last couple of years is almost it's referred to sometimes as the tyranny of the audit, where state officials have been so concerned that there are eyes on them, that there are rules to be followed and procedures to be followed, that people become reluctant, fearful of making decisions about what could happen on the ground. And so your municipality, when it's faced with a crisis, and let's say the crisis is COVID, or the crisis is the recent flooding in the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, are reluctant to act, even though they may have a great idea, even though they may know how to respond to a crisis. The problem is, if you make a recommended decision, if you approve a funding decision, someone will think you're corrupt. So corruption isn't only a problem that people have taken funding that wasn't their right to take. Corruption becomes a problem in that it makes people who are wanting to do the right thing fearful when they do that. Professionalizing the public service is a way around that. It's a way of making people accountable for what their impact is. So rather than being driven by what the audit says you ought to do, you're driven, you're motivated, and you're rewarded by whether you made the right decision and made an impact upon communities at that time. We're also in a stage where we're moving increasingly into white water. And whether it's about energy crises or veld fires or issues around violence or issues around climate change, we need our government officials at all spheres of government to be nimble. They need to be able to react, to respond to local demands, and to be able to deliver. Without that, we're not going to succeed. So that is why the idea of professionalizing the civil service is proposed as, shall we say, a necessary but not a sufficient step to be able to improve delivery. We have to do this. If we don't do it, we know that we will not be able to succeed. It's not going to be enough. We need more. We'll need more support from society as a whole. We'll need the resources, and we'll need the political will to be able to drive such an agenda forward. But I think the Planning Commission believes that without that public sector that is able to deliver, that is willing to deliver, and is not under threat that they're doing the wrong thing when they make those decisions, we think that's a necessary and absolutely essential condition to be able to move forward.
And why do you believe the Public Sector Amendment Bill is such an important tool to move that needle? You're saying you've had a direct input, particularly in the passing of that bill, and you think that is actually a major milestone towards achieving that professionalized public sector.
I mean, you're quite correct. The National Planning Commission is extremely pleased that the bill has gone through Cabinet and that it is now going through the next stages before it's approved. That bill allows us to be able to separate the function of a person managing a set of responsibilities from a person who has the issues around dealing with the politics of the agenda to which the political party that they might belong. So here we are able to say this is an official who understands the public administration, understands the various acts, and can now implement those acts, as opposed to someone who may be concerned about a shorter-term future, who's concerned about the mandate that they've been given by the political party to which they belong, or the mandate that they've been given by the people that have voted for them. Ultimately, it's again about this notion of a longer-term future, which says it doesn't really, the issue is not which political party is in charge of your municipality, your province, or the national government, but rather what are the commitments that they have made towards a longer-term future. It again is this issue of a national development plan that is shared by all, whether it's private sector who may support a particular set of political parties or another group who may support a different set of political parties. This is a national agenda that says if we want to prosper, if we want to have a healthy and safe population, these are the things that we need to do.
Yeah. Creating jobs. 11 million jobs, I think, was the target. The last time we created 2.2 million jobs was in 2010-2015, when the GDP growth rate then was at 4.6%. But if you look at it in real terms, since 2008 and 2017, the annual job creation, 141,000. That is not where we want to be. And 6 years left to 2030. Others are saying it's near impossible for us to even create the kind of jobs that we want.
Absolutely. We are way off track. And if you recall last year when the National Development Commission released our 10-year review, we said, frankly, this is not good enough. We need to have a substantial step forward. And in the response to the 10-year review, the Planning Commission issued its call for action saying, guys, we need to wake up. This is not enough. We will delude ourselves if we imagine that we can create this number of jobs in the remaining years. And so one of the things that we are calling for here is a recognition of the constraints that we faced. They are multiple. Some of them are to do with the issues around state capture, which you were talking about in your previous interview. Some of them are to do with the constraints that we've had due to COVID, due to climate change, to the rise of right-wing populism in Europe. All of these things have affected South Africa's ability to have an economy which is growing and which is employing people. So yes, we have a big problem, a really, really big problem. I think you'll also find that's why the Planning Commission is now starting to talk about what happens after the NDP. When we get to 2030, it's doubtless we are going to find that there are targets that we have not achieved. The rate of employment is probably going to be one of those ones. And so we need to start thinking, all right, we had hopes in 2012. They haven't been realized. Now what are we going to do? How do we learn from the mistakes that we have made as a country? How do we learn from the headwinds that we have faced that were things outside of our control? And how do we come up with the next step, what follows the National Development Plan that can take us forward and hopefully put us back on the course which will result in the employment levels that we envisaged in 2012 and the elimination of poverty again as we envisaged in 2012.
Yeah, I'm reminded of what the previous National Planning Commissioner, Joel Nachitenze, said a couple of months ago. He says, when you look at it, a lot of money and investment would have been made in the planning and the monitoring aspect of the work that needs to happen. But there's not a lot of investment in the coordination and the integration of these plans into actually making them produce the kind of implementation we want to see. Are you making progress? Are things improving in the coordination and integration space?
Well, that is exactly one of those difficult things that the Planning Commission debated during our Lokotla. And the concern was, how do a small group of people who are drawn from different parts of society, none of us are employed by government, how do we make an impact on not only the national plan, but also the processes which are taking place in municipalities and provinces across the country. So provinces are about to try and reconsider their own provincial development plans. Municipalities have already rewritten their integrated development plans and are now in the process of updating those each year. This Planning Commission needs to find a way in which we can influence all of those processes so that we get that kind of coordination. I think it is possible. We talked about ways in which we can do that. What are the suggestions were? Can the Planning Commission work closely with some model municipalities where we're able to deal with issues? We talked about, can the Planning Commission assist with quality assurance? We even said, can the Planning Commission provide a Q&A, question and answer service, whereby people who are involved in planning are able to reach out to us and say, what should we do in our particular municipality? What should we be doing in the Breda Valley? What should we be doing in Matatiele? So those are the kinds of things that we talked about.
Prof, I appreciate your time. Unfortunately, time always the enemy. We could have gone further, but thank you very much for coming on and your intervention this evening. Professor Julian May, National Planning Commissioner. Your thoughts? 072-110-5584. In Focus continues shortly.